Welcome, everybody, to the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, a higher learning institution established in 1963, offering a diverse array of fully accredited creative industry bachelor-level degrees. I'm Gretchen Marie Schaefer. I'm the director of RMCAD's Visiting Artist, Scholar, and Designer program. The VASD program is an interdisciplinary initiative that values passionate curiosity and explores critical, diverse, and creative inquiry through a variety of events and presentations. We are so happy to further enrich the academic experience for all of our students here at RMCAD and to serve the greater Denver metro community. Tonight, we continue the VASD program's Collapsing Time lecture series with artist Michael Jones McKean in his lecture titled On Objects, Time, and the Fallacy of Scale. This is the fifth presentation in a series which challenges structural limitations like time by flattening the past and present through creative models in order to generate new experiences and visions for the future. McKean was born in Micronesia and now splits his time between New York City and Richmond, Virginia, where he teaches at Virginia Commonwealth University. He is the recipient... Commentary from Ben in the corner here, sorry. Hi, Ben, I'm glad you're here. Michael is the recipient of numerous awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Nancy Graves Foundation Award, and the Artadia Award. McKean has also been awarded fellowships and residencies at the core program at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the MacDowell Colony, the International Studio and Curatorial Program, and the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts. McKean's work has been exhibited at multiple institutions, including the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College in New York, Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston, Horton Gallery in New York, Parisian Laundry in Montreal, Senkar University in Tel Aviv, and the Contemporary Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. As with our previous Collapsing Time series presenters, McKean's work dismantles absolutes and challenges restrictive definitions and binaries like past and future, real and replica, natural and synthetic, and fact and fiction. His practice, though rooted in sculpture, is very expansive and embodies and incites enthusiastic curiosity. Take his fascination with the tragic and beguiling story of a man who attempted to sail around the world, but eventually and mystifyingly disappeared, leaving behind only his boat, which McKean later purchased, and two confounding travel logs, one real and one fabricated. Or McKean's compelling interest in the J1 Super Jumbo Pro Max boombox, or the 1967 McCulloch chainsaw, or psychotropic medicines, or space, or the Bristol cone pine tree found here in Colorado. Being deeply and sincerely inquisitive about these things allows the artist to explore an object's affiliation to folklore, technology, anthropology, and mysticism. McKean's work also intimates a kind of time travel. His objects, installations, and language create the opportunity to look at our present moment from the speculative position of the future, asking the question, how might animal crackers, thumb drives, gold chain necklaces, raw clay, and techno-animism communicate our lives, our values, our spirituality to the future? Tonight, we and the objects of both our modern lives and the greater universe will be oriented in relation to deep time and the idea of scale, and how the collapse of time scales can help re-articulate our ancient involvement with forms, materials, meaning, representation, and poetics. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Michael Jones McKean.
All right, cool. Thank you. Thanks for that great opening, and I hope I can say some good things tonight. So thanks for coming out, and this is really official to be up on the stage like this, and hopefully there's a little feedback here, but hopefully it goes away. this is a kind of talk that's very special in some ways because it's a topic. I'm going to talk a little bit about time as it relates to my work, but it's an opportunity for me to consolidate some thinking about time. So it's a concept that floats in and out of my work, and something that I think a lot about. But when I got the invitation and the formal structure of the lecture series, I immediately was super excited about the possibility of how the work might, how a talk like this could align. Sorry, this. Can you hear it okay? It's okay. Can you hear me okay? Or is the mic not on? Okay, cool. So I am going to wade through the best I can with some notes and with some ideas, and I'll show some images of work, and hopefully we'll have some time for some questions at the end. But I wanted to start with this little short video first, and I'm going to have to kind of jog back and forth between some PowerPoint stuff and then some YouTube stuff. But I wanted to show this one, and it's super weird, and it kind of, I'll just let it run, and I'll talk about kind of what I think this is. So all of you have seen like unboxing videos before. It's like a genre, you know, where people, they get something from Amazon, or they get something and they slowly kind of take it out of the box and they present it, and it's like, you know, there's literally, you know, hundreds of millions of unboxing videos, you know. Yeah, and then there's this genre. So I think like a lot of folks, we all kind of go down, you know, YouTube wormholes sometimes, and sometimes we end up with these really curious subgenres of subgenres. And so this is, I guess, the best that I can understand is a subgenre of unboxing. But this is for folks that have new sneakers and they walk through the mud. And you know, there's tons of, at this point, there's different practitioners of this genre. So this is my most favorite practitioner. Some of them are more theatrical, some of them use different tools. This person is very special and kind of mystical in the way that they interrogate the mud with the sneakers, and there's very little audio. It's very mysterious. There's something very strange about this, but for me, I think it does a few things, and hopefully through the talk I'll be able to wade through the ways in which a video like this speaks to time. Let me turn this off first, I guess. I would encourage you to go down this wormhole too, if it if it makes sense. So, you know, there's a couple projects that I want to start out with, but you know, I thought on the plane ride here, there's a couple things that came up, and I want to try to open it up in a different way for me than I normally would within a talk. And I just was in San Francisco recently, and I spent about 4 months there. And one of the places that I went to was this place called SLAC, which is it's the Stanford National Accelerator Laboratory, and it's particle accelerators. So you know, like the Large Hadron Collider, like these kinds of things. So SLAC has a number of colliders and particle accelerators. And you know, in researching this and how it might hopefully end up in a piece one day, what I started to back up into was this idea, another idea of time. And so essentially, and this is hard to explain, but the amount of space that they're studying in these colliders is, so they're thinking of the event. So the event that they're studying is 1/4 of a second. And I was trying to understand that, and immediately the scientist that was with me, he was like, oh, 1/4, it's 1/1,000,000th of 1/1000,000th of a second. And it didn't make any more sense to me, you know. but then he sort of did it fractionally, and then it started to make sense. So it's like, okay, so 1/1000,000th, so think of it as a fraction, 1/1000,000th of a second, so 1/1,000,000,000, and that again, 1/1,000,000th of that time. So that's 1/4 of a second. So it's an infinitesimally small amount of time. It's a kind of time space that we can't understand as humans. Like it surpasses any kind of human limit that we could understand. Only pure physics or pure mathematics could approach it. So I got really excited about this because there's all of these people in this place on the planet that are studying events that exist tangibly inside that amount of time. That got me really excited. And, that is bracketed, by another expanse of time. So one that in some ways next to 1/4 of a second seems like maybe really banal, but so like say 14 billion years. So that would be how old the universe is. Like when we measure it, we get to 14 billion years. So it's another kind of expanse of time that doesn't make any sense. Like it's these two limits, and we just have ourselves. We just have our bodies. We just have this sort of kind of silly meat body, that we have to, interrogate these distances and these expanses with. And so what we end up with is is sometimes a kind of confusion, or a kind of a misunderstanding, or, because the temporal space that we exist in is one about like Raisin Bran or Cocoa Pebbles, or avocado toast or soy chorizo bagel, and it's like we're making decisions that are like very different than 1/4 of a second and intangible events that live inside of them. So I wanted to start out with that, and as a kind of lead-in to a work that I spent quite another kind of time, the time of production, the time of making, the time of thought. So I worked on this project for about 10 years, and actually I still am working on some other variations on it. But I thought to open up with this one. So this is, as was mentioned in the introduction, I consider myself a sculptor, and all of my investigations and thinking and musings, they all kind of factor through the lens of sculpture. So, in thinking about that, one of the limits that I encountered was the ways in which materials and things all have a time signature, that they sort of produce a very, in some sense, a very clear understanding about when and where they came from in terms of time. So, a great instance, say, is the first thing that I showed you. So it's like you have these shoes, right? You have a very specific kind of Adidas high top. And so when we see these shoes, and even if you're not like a sneakerhead, but you know something about shoes, it's like, well, you have an understanding that this was produced probably, in a certain kind of time period. So probably, maybe even 10 years, maybe 20 years, because they're kind of retro. And there's other kinds of objects that do this too. It's like, we have copies of copies, like a Windsor chair or something like that. Like when we see a Windsor chair, we don't quite know sometimes when it was produced, because we have versions of a Windsor style. so I started, thinking of it, or for instance, like cell phones. Like cell phones is the most classic example, where it's like, if we lined up all of our cell phones, we could like understand almost month by month sometimes about a kind of cell phone production. So that's a time signature in the way that it's stamped in an object. But I started thinking about other kinds of objects that exist with different reference to time, and perhaps like maybe time outliers in some ways. So one form that I got super excited by was this idea of the rainbow. So the rainbow is this kind of this strange image that appears, but when we see it, we are witnessing it a strange kind of thing, because it's time traveling. Like the thing that we're seeing is the same thing that our grandparents' grandparents saw, the same thing that like early Homo sapiens saw, like the same thing that perhaps 100 years from now someone else will see. So it's this strange force because it's a constant. Like it's sort of a dependable, sort of very, what would be the word? Like high fidelity in the way that it repeats itself. And I got interested in this as a way to sort of begin a long-form poem about time in relation to objects. So that's one section of the piece. I guess the other section, to open up maybe another discourse, is like I was trying to make public art, and I had this question about like how okay, I was making sculpture in my studio, I was making sculpture for galleries, sometimes museums, and I was like, okay, how do I make a work that somehow that lives publicly, that has a different kind of presence in relation to bodies? And that became a kind of a challenge and a way to design a work that didn't just translate what I was making in the studio and kind of move it outdoors, which might fall under the kind of an idiom of public art, but to actually think about a project that could be a civically scaled sculpture, a civically scaled public work. And so one way to do this was I started thinking about materials. And this is something that will come up again and again throughout the presentation probably, is like trying to become as accurate and as careful and as sensitive to materiality as I could. And of course, if one's thinking about a rainbow, like the primary material there is water. So I started thinking more about, okay, so what if I turned an urban building into essentially a machine to capture rainwater, to clean it, and to project water into the sky at very precise moments when a rainbow could happen. So to turn this building into some kind of machine. So this image is just to give you kind of scale. It's like, this is like as tall as a person. Like you can see, this is like a big door. Like, so these are like super tall. So the building was, these tanks was about 65,000 gallons of water, and it would, every time that it would rain, the water would fall on the roof, it would collect into these large tanks, and then it would be ready for a rainbow event. So that was an interesting side part. And then what happened is that this piece became one of the largest urban rainwater catchment systems in the Midwest at the time. And so you had all these people that were kind of looking at this as an example for a way that an artwork could catalyze a different approach to just something we should be doing. So it's like, well, we should be saving our water in a different way. We should think of water as a precious commodity. So this project taught me a lot about the ways in which thinking in a different scale could perhaps open up a new way for an artwork to be a catalyst. So just to walk through this project a little bit, there was an internal component too. So one of the elements that existed was, let me back up. there were a few objects that I put in the gallery that lived in relation to the rainbow to sort of open up this poem about time. And one of them, as Gretchen mentioned in the intro, was a bristlecone pine tree. So this is something that actually grows nearby here, which is exciting to me. So folks know about the bristlecone, right? It's a very special tree that, so somewhere in its DNA is the ability to live for thousands and thousands of years. And so you have examples of bristlecones that we don't even quite know how old they are, but some are over 5,000 years old, definitely. So that became an exciting object to think through time with, that somehow this object, in its sort of molecular structure, had the possibility to surpass all of us generationally after generation after generation. Another object, and this bristlecone was watered on a constant drip from the rainbow water, so it was like this sort of loop that came back into the gallery. Another object that I thought through was that has a different kind of time signature, as I mentioned, are quilts, or blankets even more generally. So it's like blankets, for as long as humans have been alive, there's probably been something like a blanket. So something, because we need, it gets cold and we need to cover ourselves. So now you have this sort of thing, if we zoomed out and looked at Earth, there's, thousands and thousands of blanket traditions that are carved up around the world. So even if you look at in the States, it's like if you look at, say, like quilting traditions, and then you zoom in more granularly and you end up with like an Amish quilting tradition, and then a Pennsylvania Dutch Amish quilting tradition, and then one that sort of existed in a small little town for about 30 years. And so this quilt is from the 1880s from Pennsylvania. And so folks that, that look at these things and understand the provenance of quilts, they can tell us very precise details about this object. This is another sort of strange object that has popped up again and again in some ways in some work. So this is a 110-pound meteorite. And so on the planet, there's a few objects that kind of, like, in a psychedelic way, are older than the Earth itself. And so this is one of them. So it's like you have a few kind of morsels of material that when we look at it, it surpasses the age of the Earth. So like that's the kind of like strange mind gymnastics that sculpture can sometimes perform. This one fell in Argentina, in what's now Argentina, about 5,000 years ago. And the last object in this piece, and there's more to say about this project. I mean, it took 10 years to make, but this is a shell that came from Micronesia, where I was born. So another kind of object that's caught in this very slow-mo evolutionary creep. So it's living through time in a very different way. So this is a really hard image to see, but I wanted to show it because it starts to open up this question of scale that when Gretchen asked for the title, I was like, what do I title this thing? Like, well, I'm thinking about scale, and like maybe scale doesn't exist. Maybe scale maybe is like a thing that it's like, maybe it's a thing that it's like we just invented, right? So, and then I started thinking more about this, and I'll talk about this image in a second and how it relates. But so I was thinking more about this, and one thing. I mean, the human mind is an amazing organ, and we do all these incredible things up there. But one of the things that we do sometimes is that we create systems that make it easier to think, but that actually misdescribe or don't describe the world accurately. And so an example, I mean, we could say is like dichotomy. Like dichotomy is a very, very useful way of thinking. And it's like oftentimes like people back into dichotomy or these sort of these polar ways of thinking because it's so easy. It reduces the world in a way that things make sense. But this is actually not how the world is working. I mean, it's like, this is something that I think as students, it's like we must remember that this is not how the world's operating. It's like, it's an interesting way of thinking, but it's not actually how it's working. And so this is another thing about scale. Like, scale is a useful tool. Like, scale enables us to be able to think about things that are very, very big or very, very small in relation to our body. But like, in a realist, materialist sense, scale does not exist. Like, scale doesn't operate that way. Like size exists, but scale doesn't exist. Scale is a useful human term. So I started thinking about this more, and this is an image that is kind of hard to see, but I'll talk through it. Do you see like some things floating here? Yeah. You see them? Okay, cool. So just making sure. So this is, some people know this image. Some people might even know, not the images floating or the objects floating on top, but what's up? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this probably, and people will argue this, but this might be the most important photograph ever taken. And so just to talk through this really quickly. So essentially, partially because Hubble was malfunctioning. So Hubble's a space telescope, right? So, Hubble was malfunctioning and it wasn't doing its job very well. So the astronomers that were using it and programming it, they came up with a solution. And so all of these sort of jobs that it could do. And one of the things that it could do was it could stay straight and it could look one place pretty well. So, so what they did was like, okay, we got a great idea for this. Okay, so we're going to look into deep space time. So they chose an area that seemed like there was nothing there, like nothing there. We really thought that it was a black universe, like just nothing, like the void of space. And we stared at it. And so to give you a sense of that amount of space, so if you were to hold like a pencil point at arm's length, the amount of space that Hubble was looking at filled the pencil point. So really like a pixel, like maybe 1.5 pixels. If you have a retina screen, definitely 1 pixel. So Hubble's looking at it, and it looks at it for like a couple weeks. And then, they get it back, and this is the weird thing about astronomy now, is because it doesn't really quite look like this, but it goes through a bunch of interpolations. And what they find is this crazy thing, because in this 1 pixel of sky real estate, in a place that they thought was totally void of any matter, we found hundreds of new galaxies. And so if we think about our galaxy, in our galaxy, there's billions of stars, like billions of stars. So in this one tiny little pixel, we find hundreds of galaxies. And if we think about our galaxy as just sort of being average, there's billions and billions of new stars. And now, as we think about exoplanets, and we think about how the Earth is not so special, like we keep finding exoplanets every month now. So it's like this sort of crazy moment where time-space collapses on us, where it's like we see that we are very, very small. And this is a really important tool in some ways. So this is a piece that somehow has these hand-painted objects that are overlaid on top of the Hubble's ultra-deep field photograph. So it's really hard to sometimes choose pieces to talk about, and I thought to talk about this one in a way because it's very scary to me, and I'm still trying to figure bits of it out. So this is a piece called Rivers, and it's a piece I worked on for about 3 years, and it ended up it happened in Pittsburgh over 9 days. And the DNA of the piece was that every day, one event would happen over 9 consecutive days. And the ways in which that these things happened were actually sometimes invisible to the public. And I was testing some kinds of limits for a way that, again, like a public project might function. And so just to kind of give you a rundown here, so there was 9 events. So like this one was a human hand touching a telescope at the Allegheny Observatory. This one was a human hand touching an electron microscope at the University of Pittsburgh. I worked for a long time trying to donate a book to the Carnegie Library. And there's a book called Navigator, which is a book about the ways in which the Three River systems looked in the 1880s. And so this book was gifted to the library and lives in the permanent collection and in circulation. This one is a human collarbone inserted into a boulder on the Allegheny River. So the other thing I should say is that the way that this project lives now is there's 2 images. So there's this sort of very kind of mysterious black and white image, and then there's a color image that alludes to this event actually happening. This is a text message sent by satellite phone from the Three River Junction. This one's more complicated to explain, and the other thing I should say is the other way that they live is by like a very, very small, almost poetic description. So each day has a 1-sentence, sometimes 2-sentence description. So this one is there was a boat that was tied on the banks of the Ohio, and was kind of just left there. And this handle was taken from the boat. So I removed this handle, and then a piece of lead from the Atlantic Ocean from a boat that sunk in the 1600s was dredged up and we made a mold of the handle, and that lead was cast into this handle, and then it was replaced on this boat. But it was said much more eloquently. And this one was one of the most public events, and it was a bonfire on the banks of a river. And the wood from the bonfire was a collection of driftwood from around the world. So there was hundreds of pieces of driftwood that I was collecting over years to make this bonfire. This was a rainbow for 500 seconds. And so these 9 actions together, this idea of like thinking about materiality, thinking about the recombinatory possibilities of materials, thinking about time and this bracket of time to do these events, thinking about different ways in which time expired, 500 seconds, 1600s boat, a 1980s speedboat, satellites roaming around the planet. These kinds of a fire for a celebratory event, the combustion of wood entering into the atmosphere of Pittsburgh, like thinking about very, very small things, but thinking about the ways that these small things like sort of domino and could perhaps in some strange way change the course of Pittsburgh. And this was kind of my ambition for it. Like if somehow these 9 events, something as small as a human making contact with a telescope or a human making contact with an electron microscope could open up space for something paradigmatic to happen. So the other thing I wanted to talk about in doing this is, sometimes the way that projects domino together. So like I'll work on projects for a long time, and inevitably one project starts to bleed into another project and starts to open up space for another project, and then that project engulfs another project and something starts to happen. So I wanted to show a few examples of that. So this is a project that I worked on a number of years ago, and it was started with a very simple query. So this is the Earth, and the Earth is round. Are there any flat earthers here? You're a flat earther? Oh, okay. It's crazy. It's crazy. You just have to ask these days. So, and anyway, so I wanted to figure out how what the longest distance around the Earth was, and at this time around 2004, we started to get this super robust, high-def understanding of what the Earth was like. So values meter by meter for what the Earth was like in certain places. So in a way, you could take that data, you can have it, and you could do stuff with it, and it was available. And this was the first moment that this was really publicly available. And I started thinking through these possibilities, and one was like, okay, well, with computer power, I can figure out all of the possibilities for the way that one could create a great circle around the Earth, and one is the longest. So one taking into consideration all the minute up and down shifts. So like this is a shift, right? So it's like in the computer program, it's understanding like, almost and sometimes like centimeter by centimeter shifts. So the problem with that is it's billions and billions of data points, and like, trillions of numbers that's being computed to come up with some very simple line that represents the longest distance around the Earth. So I wanted to start with that, because as I was working on that, one of the kind of sidebar bits of research that I started to walk into was folks that, circumnavigators that failed. And there's a whole subgenre that is exciting and scary and weird. And one person in particular I got really excited by, this guy, Donald Crowhurst. And there's a book that came out about this event. And it was, I'll describe it in very short detail, but there's a lot of information about this subject. So essentially, there was this guy, Donald Crowhurst. In the late 60s, there was a race in England called the Golden Globe. And it was a race, and so the race also had something to do with time, was to become the first person to solo circumnavigate the Earth without stopping. So there was a group of people that entered this race, and so he entered the race, and it was sort of this dreamer. And he had convinced all these folks that he was the one that was going to do this, that he was the one that could win this race. And he started to design a boat. It was called the Tin-Mouth Electron, which was at the time a super experimental craft. So trimaran. At the time, no one was sailing trimarans, and he entered the race and kind of forgot to tell folks that he never had left the English Channel. So he got into this race, and he was like, sailing into the Atlantic Ocean. And the Atlantic is not really a kind place. And, he didn't have really any open water sailing experience. And he started to realize that he wasn't up for it. He couldn't do it. And but he had leveraged his whole family's savings, and along with many other people's savings, and that he tricked them to enter this race and to build this boat. So he's in the middle of the Atlantic, trying to figure out how to sail, and also going slowly insane. And so he's all alone, and he doesn't have a lot of things to do. And he slowly, at a certain point, realizes he can't do it, and he starts to fake his coordinates. He starts to tell people that he's in somewhere else on the Earth that he's actually not. And so pretty soon he's on this heroic voyage around the world. Meanwhile, he's in the Atlantic just sort of ghosting around. And so what happens is that after about 200 and some days, he starts this long manifesto about the meaning of life and about time and about time's connection to our body and about the escaping the confines of time. And one of the books he was reading was Einstein's Relativity. And he ended up jumping off of what's believed he jumped off the back of the boat with the timekeeper and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. And so about 10 days later, the boat shifted into a shipping lane, and it was found. And the boat was sold at auction. So it went to Jamaica. It was sold at auction. Somebody named Bunny, he bought the boat. He was bought it as a pleasure cruiser. Was kind of cruising around Montego Bay. At some point, he sold the boat to someone named Winston McDermott, who lived in the Caymans, and he sailed the boat from Jamaica to Cayman. And at some point after that, it was damaged in a hurricane. And he knew the history of Crowhurst, and that it was probably haunted, and there was all of this legend at that point about the boat. And it was when it was damaged, they drug it to the beach and beached it with the idea that they would repair it eventually. And anyway, I got lost in this story like many other people have gotten lost in this story. So this is a kind of, in some ways, like a strange siren, like a siren song somehow that people get caught up in. And so I ended up buying the boat, and the way, and I'm happy to answer questions about it, but it's like there was this limit where I was trying to understand the story deeper and deeper and deeper. And I had read everything that I could possibly read about it. I had talked to people that I could talk to. There's plays about it. There's movies about it. There's songs about it. And I needed somehow to figure out a way to insert myself in some small way into the narrative, to somehow understand it in some way from the inside. And this was a kind of conceptual query, like, what if I bought the boat? Like, what if somehow I became the steward of this object? And so when I did that, a lot of things changed. And this object has really been a teacher for me. Like, it's taught me so many things about the nature of objects and materiality. So it's an ongoing project, and I'll get into it. So we're still thinking about the ways in which projects lead to other projects. This is a project called 12verse. And so 12verse is something that I just started, and it's a 10-year-long project. This date up here is wrong, and I apologize for that. But essentially what 12verse is that it's another great circle. And on this great circle, I'm trying to connect 12 locations in perfect symmetry. And each of those locations will tell us something in total about ourselves and about the planet that we live on. So thinking about the Earth as a maximum unit. So at this point, these are all just tests. So I've been testing circles, a lot of circles. So here's one kind of not average, this is actually a nice circle, but it won't be the 12verse circle. So this one actually holds a massive telescope, a special island, an F1 engine, a particle accelerator, security exchange, and open pit mine. So incredibly, this great circle, so imagine like if you were to walk in a straight line all around the world and end up at the same place. The idea is that this circle connects all of these locations. So in order to do this, it's like testing thousands and thousands and thousands of circles. So this is just one small version. So this is a little over 10,000 circles. So this is red circles over top of the map. And so the way that you're backing into some kind of like idea of infinity, where it's like there's an infinite number of possibilities and trying to find one version that occupies some kind of mystical reality that connects all of these places that describe something deep and poetic. So I've been working on this for a while, and it's some more to come. So I thought to show just a couple. This is like a teaser that I want to show. I just have to bounce over. So I just went to the Caymans, or a little bit ago. Is this going to work? Oh, it's over here. And I went there to look at the tin-mouth electron that I talked about. So a group, an archaeologist came, a film crew came, and we started working on a film. And so this is kind of a trailer for the first point of 12 Earths. The boat is the site of some of the largest questions that humans have asked themselves. And thinking about a boat whose sole purpose was to understand the Earth as a sphere, as a single object, to circumnavigate the Earth and to know it as something singular and total. The boat becomes a very logical starting point to a piece that aspires to think about the Earth as a site. To think about not just a series of individual places as sites, but the Earth as a totality. Sometimes you just gotta roll with the crew, you know. It's like, yeah. Anyway, so that's a little trailer. So there's going to be, this year is a big year for 12 Earths. There's a bunch of things that are coming out, and I'm really excited about this project. And really, it's totally consumed me. Just really quick, sorry, I should bounce back to this real quick. The other thing that we did while we were there, just to kind of obsess a little bit more about this object, was we did a, is this the one I want? Maybe. Yeah. So we did a crazy scan of the object. So one of the things that you'll see is like the boat is falling apart. I mean, it's like, it's sort of lost its gestalt as a thing. And so the other thing is that many people know about this boat. So I get emails about this thing pretty much every day. And people just asking or trying to find someone that has some contact to this object. And the other thing is that it's on this remote island, and it's pretty much protected it for 30 years. But every once in a while, people will take things from it. So it's totally just sitting in the middle of the island. So it's 50 feet from the ocean. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to do this really intense scan of the boat. And this is a really early version of it. It's since become much more detailed, but an idea to somehow archive it. So this is something that we also worked on. So let's go back here real quick. So I thought, so that sort of talks a little bit about starting from this one idea of a circle, 14 years ago, really almost 20 years ago, but and then ending up to this one where I might have 9 more years of working on a project that relates to some question that started decades ago. So I thought to also show some sculptures too. And so running parallel to all this is a kind of very material-based process that organizes itself into more discrete objects. And I'm going to breeze through some of them just to give you a sense. So this is maybe another grouping that shows a kind of investigation. So these are some solar panel collages. These are like these low relief, like clay on top of a solar panel. And then this past September, there was a show in Paris that I did, and it was a group of cold cast solar panels in silver, nickel, and aluminum. So it was a kind of a grouping of 9 different objects. So each panel was a different vintage of solar panel, and each panel contained a different kind of index of objects. So this one is snacks. I like, snacks are important. But one thing that I wanted to say is, just to kind of dial it back a little bit and make it kind of maybe hopefully not too anecdotal, but one experience that I was having, when I first started making sculpture was actually one of dissatisfaction. And there's something that I was motivated to make objects and to think through material, but I was always upset that I couldn't get my sculptures to say things as clearly as, say, like a film, or like a book. And the way that a book can kind of encapsulate a full idea. And there's something like when I walked into the studio, I was like, you just look at this dumb thing, and I say it in a kind of a flip way, but it's kind of true in some ways. It's like you walk in and that the object doesn't report back in the same way as a film might, or as a YouTube video might, as a play might, as a book might. And what I started to realize was that sculpture actually communicates in this wildly, wildly different way. And in some ways, it's like it has to do with time. And it's so when we have systems that meter time, like say a film, for instance, or a book, like if we were to pass around a book, everyone would know how to use it. You would open it up and you would be able to pass through. It's a time-based form. And so time is delivered to us in a very careful, very metered way. But when you see a sculpture, it's just there. It's just all at once. So it's a kind of strange thing to get adjusted to. And what I noticed is actually working with students is that there's a weirdness there because it doesn't perform the same way. And so some people think it's broken. Like sculpture is broken in a way. So real quick, this is a sculpture with a cryogenic freezer. So this black cube is a freezer, and inside the freezer are a group of rocks. So different kinds of rocks: igneous rocks, metamorphic, sedimentary, and the rocks are chilled to the coldest day ever recorded. So yeah, this idea that a sculpture could actually do different things was a big moment for me. That embedded within the sculpture's DNA, there was this whole other mystical way that it was communing with time. And that that realization opened up a lot of space for me to explore, and not to think that there was something deficient in the medium itself, that there was actually another way, another language or syntax that it was using to communicate. One that's totally strange and circuitous, elliptical, staccato, like it's inert, it's inward. Like these are ways that I've come to really love the kinds of mysteries that can live in a sculpture. So another maybe sidebar thing as we're kind of looking at some of these is it's, you know, how materials end up in the work is maybe important. It's probably obvious because you're looking at things that are made out of stuff, but I think we live in this very particular moment where things operate differently. And it's a kind of, you know, some call it like a kind of techno-animism. Some folks call it like an animism that's infused with late capitalism. But the ways that a thing opens up a whole other set of agreements, or the way that a backstory can live in an object, is very, very different now than, say, that it could live even 20 years ago. And so, for instance, like, you know, one example that I love, and I was just eating an apple actually, and so if we go to a store and we go food shopping, there's this crazy crisis that can emerge, because all of us are looking at food and we're trying to make decisions about what we should purchase in relation to our bank accounts, in relation to our health, in relation to what we think we should be eating. And so you end up in the produce section, and this place is super, super crazy. It's like you have I mean, if, you know, next to the hotel I'm staying at, I went over to Whole Foods, and it's like, even in Whole Foods, it's like, this is a special sanctuary. And there's all of these different versions of apples, you know, like, so apples that are heirloom apples, or apples that have low carbon footprints, or apples that are definitely organic. And then they always have an apple that comes from New Zealand, just because maybe you don't want to spend $1.27 on an apple. So you have this apple that literally came from around the world, but somehow it's cheaper than the apple that came from 30 miles away. And it's like this incongruency. But this is all to say, is like, we have all of this information about our things. We know where they come from. We know materiality. And if we don't, we know how to find it. And so these backstories open up into more backstories, open up in these chapters about the things around us. So it's a way of animating the things around us. So it's like, none of the things around us live as kind of inert things. Like, there's stories behind them. And, you know, to a greater or lesser degree, all of us understand those. So I'm just going to keep showing this. This is a project, you know, this is another version I thought to show you. So this one started out in 2012 as this project called the Folklore. And then I wanted to try another version that opened it up a little bit more. This one was called The Religion, a year later. And then this project was one I finished last year, called The Ground. So they all somehow kind of relate together. So I'm going to show a quick video, and I'm going to talk over it. And I'm almost done. Let's see. This one is a little video just to give you a sense of some of the movements. Can I make this work? Yeah. It's going to do it. So, you know, I just thought of one more thing I wanted to say about time real quick. You know, so, you know, I was on this plane today, and I was thinking about this lecture. And, you know, you're on this plane and you get in this sort of like tube, and you're flying. And, you know, I left one time zone and I ended up in another time zone. And, you know, this massive amount of space is compressed. Time itself is transferred in some way. But what's happening? Oh yeah, and then I got off the plane, and you know, there's like these special things where time becomes, you know, accelerated differently. Actually, it was in Dallas that this happened. So you get off the plane in Dallas. You can walk on those little, like, they're not escalators where you go down, but you get on the thing and you're like, they kind of take you off, you know? I don't know what they're really called, like walkways or something, but they're really weird because it messes with a kind of time thing happen, because we're used to walking at our cadence, right? So I see things passing me by. But all of a sudden you get on this thing and you're just like, you're walking faster, and you're kind of alerted to what's happening, and your senses are a little bit heightened, and things are moving around. And it's pretty weird, but you know, what's happening in these spaces, and it's like you think about getting in your car and you're like, you turn the ignition, it's like, boom, things are happening, like something's in the engine, it's like internal combustion, gasoline's moving, this exhaust is coming out. So what's happening here is really important to talk about, because time itself is operating in these spaces. So when we burn coal, what we're essentially doing is it's the hyperbolic release of time. So time is compressed inside this object. So millions and millions of years of time and decay, so solar energy, is compressed into this little object. So when we watch this and light's emitted from it, in a sense it's like we're watching time expire, like it's the hyperbolic release of time. And this was another sort of like realization that I made about materiality and the ways in that time unfolds itself in certain kinds of materials, especially in these kinds of you know, like coal materials, petroleum materials. Like, this is an important thing, I think, to remember. All right, let's shift back here real quick. We'll just wander through some details of the sculpture. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. I must have not turned the YouTube video off, and it's going into some Ken Burns zone or something. So, you know, there's a whole other chapter to a talk that is maybe in a parallel universe. I'm having that talk right now, but you know, in this sculpture, I was trying to think about you know, the ways that if I could build an arc, like if I could build a sculpture that actually was kind of an arc, that depicted all of these moments and scenes and populations that would live in a space. So dioramas, you know, that quoted museology, or quoted a kind of like inchoate, like pre-time space, or you know, domestic spaces like a bedroom, or thinking about the ways that and then in terms of the arc, this is an important part. So you have all of these representations that exist in this piece. On the side of the piece, so this is existing, sorry, this is existing over here. And the side of the piece is a number of units that are archiving thousands of materials. So mineraloids, minerals, elements, fossils, organic matter, water samples, shells. I mean, there was as many things as I could possibly, I could possibly put and get my hands on. So it was like this kind of arc for a kind of baseline of earthly existence in terms of its materiality. So that existed in the space. All right, it's the last slide. Thanks a lot.
So we do want to open it up to questions, if there are any questions.
Yeah, I would love
to get
answer
started.
questions.
And then just give me a second to get the mic to you when you have a question, but just put your hand up.
So I was just curious, you got in, it sounded like you kind of were like looking at art, talking about time, and you had peers around you who knew about time and you could talk about that. Were you already thinking about time, or how did you get into just like learning about all this, and how did you get into that inspiration, basically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that question. You know, I should have actually mentioned, I love art, and it's, if you think about, if this is an elliptical way of answering it, but it's like, if you think about, so it's different strata. So, if we're thinking about, say, time or space or gravitation, you have something called physics, right? And then if you kind of one step different than that, it's like if you have atoms or molecules, or the way that molecules form, into different combinations, you have chemistry. And then from chemistry, it's like, okay, so you have molecules that form themselves into sort of inert substances. Maybe it's geology. And then it's like, from geology, it's like, okay, how else can these things form? It's like, maybe it's biology. It's like more complex systems, right? More complex things is biology. And then from biology, it's like, well, how do these systems organize themselves? And it's like, what is that? It's like ecologies. And then it's like, from there, you get to something like culture. And it's like, so you start at space-time, right? You start at this place, and you work your way through chemistry or geology, all the way down to something like philosophy, or all the way down to something like politics, and art exists under that rubric. And for me, like, my experience, like, I'm just an artist, and I'm really follow my work, and I hope that in some ways the work can always be smarter than me. And it's like, as I keep throwing all my time at it, in some ways it develops an IQ that surpasses my own. And I have to keep following it. And so I end up, with books on my shelf that I would never have otherwise. But it doesn't come from an interest in science or an interest in time. It comes from an interest in art. And so I think it's important to say that. Yes.
Anybody else?
Hey. In the ground video, is that a rendering of things you've tangibly made, or is it, what's going on there? Or do you have like a crane pulling a camera through the whole entirety of a...
That's a great question. Yeah. So it's like a drone you can get at a store, and like, you can kind of like float it around, and you should try it. It's like, it's really opened up some documentation possibilities, and just the way that drone technology can work. And I think if I were to do it, I could do it better again. But yeah, it's all real. So you're not seeing a rendering. You're seeing the actual thing, and it's just drone flybys.
Anybody else? I had one question, and then I'll come to you. Can you talk about the Band-Aids a little bit? They come up in a couple of different places, and I'm just curious.
Yeah, sure.
on
So there's a couple sculptures that have Band-Aids. So, like this last one, there's some Band-Aids. So this is, just to make sense of it, so there's this sort of like negative space Band-Aid thing, and then positive space, and this weird kind of, brown zone. And yeah, I mean, and then in the solar panel, there's some Band-Aids as well. And there's another sculpture I'm working on that has some Band-Aids in it. And, I think, well, there's a couple. Like one, in a very simple way, is there's, I really love morphology. So, the way things kind of shape themselves. And I think probably like everyone, like when you go into Rite Aid or when you go into Walmart, and I'm just, walking in as a human, and, you walk in and you see like this huge bank of Band-Aids, and it's just like, I mean, how many different ways can you cut yourself? It's like a whole wall of Band-Aids. I mean, literally, there's like over 100 just in one store. And then if you go to Walgreens, it's slightly different. If you go to Target, it's like, wow. And you can just start to see this, like, how many different kinds of Band-Aids are there? So this was just a first kind of scratch at it, where, let's see, just kind of zooming through time here, and it's like this one is, it's just like different kinds of Band-Aids. So I really like that morphology, or like this one of different kinds of ways that, snack foods organize themselves into shapes. And so that's one thing that I really liked about the Band-Aids. But the other thing is like, there's certain kinds of objects that, that reference the body. And I really like the way that Band-Aids do that, and this idea of healing, regeneration, a kind of subplot in a lot of the works, is the way that materials given a long enough kind of time span are liquid, like they're always becoming something else. And so thinking about in some small, more human time scale, it's like this idea that we can regenerate. It's like, wow, that is like crazy. We can regenerate. So Band-Aids.
I kind of have a couple things that I was wondering about. But you were saying that like you're trying to convey like the sort of messages that you find in films and in books and stuff that are more linear, but in sort of like single objects. How do you think that you experimented to find a way to do that?
Yeah, that's great. So, I should say, just to clarify, is that I think in a static sculpture, it will never sort of do the thing that a book can do or like a film could do. Like there just isn't, they're not compatible that way. But the way that I'm exploring it, I think, so for instance, like, when you, let me see if I can get my cursor back here. Oops. Maybe not. Oh, there it is. The way that you can maybe see this more tangibly, So, like in an investigation like this one, I'm dealing with cells, like if you think about, like not cellular cells, but like cells like in a comic. So the way that time lives in that space is a kind of fractured time, but it's an agreement in the way that the mind makes a leap. So, one of the things that sculpture has is proximity. So it's like if you have a belief in it, like two things next to one another can become nothing, or they can become everything. And it's like the way that they live in proximity to one another is really important. So in a sculpture like this, or in one like this, it's like building very determined, relationships where things live next to one another, where you can kind of make these jump cuts in the mind. So even though it's static, even though it's like it's not something that one might read in that way, or you don't see time unfurl the way it does in filmic language, time lives there. There's a kind of illusion to it. So that's one kind of exploration. But actually, people talk about this all the time, and where they'll ask me about, like, well, why didn't you, you have all these things that are kind of like stages sometimes, or like these spaces, like, why not put some video in there, or like, why not put some sound in there? And I'm I'm really interested in stillness. Like, it's like, and I don't want to interrupt that kind of space that is conjured by like radical stillness. So it really needs to have a kind of inert quality to it. And I really love the weirdness that comes out of those spaces. It's a great question.
Well, yeah, the other thing that I was going to ask was
Sure.
also sort of in relation, do you construct the spaces that everything dwells in?
Do I make them?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
rooms.
Yeah, yeah, I do. It takes forever, I mean, like this one. I think I lost some of myself in this one. It was really. I mean, the group that I worked with on this one was the Contemporary in Baltimore, and they're very incredible in the sense of the generosity that they give over to one artist. So they work with one artist to produce one exhibition a year, and so they throw all their resources at this project. And it was kind of dizzying, but yeah, every detail is handled. So like a welded tree, or like this bespoke floor, these arches, or the lighting, or this weird clay water birth scene. All of these prosthetic heads, their hairstyles, their makeup, their costumes. Like every small little tiny bit is touched. And the logic in this piece, like in some ways, and the architecture is all constructed, on site. So the logic of this piece, like I set these very simple rules early on, and it was like everything that you see had to be a representation. Like it had to be a kind of version of a reality, in order for those small little boxes that hold real materials to somehow have the right kind of energy or life force there. So, when I started, and I was like, all right, everything's going to be a representation. And then you're like, well, I got to build a cave, and every single rock has got to be made, and it's like you're sitting there, and it's like you're kind of building this world. And it's taken a year. It took a year of every single day, like 16, 18 hours with a team of people, like constructing this reality. So, but yeah, everything's made.
Will the ground, if that's not a permanent exhibition, will it exist again in another form, or will it be like dismantled?
Yeah, that's a great question too. It's that it doesn't live anymore. So it was the way that the Contemporary worked is they are a nomadic museum, and they use spaces as they come up. And this was a project that I was working on and needed a really large space, and one came up, and we were able to get a year-long lease on the space. And so it had a lifespan, and then it came down, and it was tragic. Because it's super hard, because it's like even in the projects that have temporary lives, like I can't think about installation. Like I need to make a sculpture, and the sculpture has a timeline, but I couldn't kind of, like, I wanted to finish every detail, like the inside of things, like things that no one would see. And it was kind of driving people crazy because I was really sculpting the inside of things. So it's a weird thing because you know, most of the things I make now have permanent lives. So when this came down, it was actually psychologically pretty rough. But yeah, a lot of the pieces still live as elements, but I haven't really figured out if it might materialize into like another version of itself. Like, that's totally possible. So I tried to save as much of the elements as I could.
Okay, this is kind of like a two-part question, but it's short. We didn't get a lot of background as far as like what got you to this point, like throughout your livelihood.
Great.
But I was gonna say I appreciate the dedication of 10 years and every detail and stuff like that. But I was curious, like how all this is funded and how you have the time to go put those 16, 18 hours into that and then still have an everyday life and pay your bills and that type of stuff.
Oh, that's a great question.
I thought maybe selling the sculptures, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, well, the life thing is interesting. I mean, maybe just to talk about that for a sec, because I kind of glossed over that I'm living. But you know, I had it's super counterintuitive, and maybe this doesn't work this way for a lot of folks, but you know, I was really into sports when I was young, and I went to college on a basketball scholarship, and you know, I also went to college for ceramics, and which was weird to sort of have these two things kind of floating. And what happened was when I was in college, like I was playing sports and super dedicated, and it's like there's an ethos of practice that exists in sports, that you know, once you believe in practice, it's the thing that saves you. It's the thing that kind of, you know, you get better. You practice and you get better. And so I kind of had this mentality when my kind of athletic career was winding down and I was becoming more and more like interested in the possibilities of art making, that it was like, okay, well, if I just take this kind of thing that I'm doing over here, practice, and just practice really hard at art, like I'll get better at it, you know? And it's a different, and I bring it up because sometimes I think there's a mentality in art around talent, and that you have talent, and that you have it or you don't. And I think that there's another approach that perhaps is like more dogged and more like a work ethic, where you go and you work at it and you try to become better. And so I think that kind of is an important thing, and it actually leads into your question about, you know, how all this works, like how to fund these things, or how these things just happen. And it's, you know, you're seeing a very, very small selection of things. And, you know, like the parallel universe exercise, you know, like in another version, I would go all the way back to undergrad and show you, you know, what I was making when I was a junior or a senior, or what I made when I, you know, when I got my MFA, and like my thesis show, or like what I made the first 5 years out of school, and like how I cobbled it together. And, you know, I think that might be interesting to do, and it opens up, and it makes something more real. But I should, you know, I say this, and I still live very much the same. Like when I think of being in grad school and trying to make sculptures, and like saying like, oh, you know, I'll just, if I eat cream of wheat, you know, for the next 3 months, I could use the money, you know, from my loan, and like I can do this. And so it was like this kind of mentality, and I still do this. I still maybe, I mean, it's not cream of wheat, but it's some version of that, you know, or like, I live in my studio. We have a 250 square foot space that me and my wife and my 2-year-old live inside of. And it's like, so I have a 2,000 square foot studio. So it's like, it's like these ridiculous kind of things that you do to make your work. And, I think for me and in my reality, it all seems very logical, but sometimes when I say it like this, it seems like extreme. And so, and I think, trying to take, one more thing I'll say about this, just in terms of like how things get made and as it might relate to folks in the room, is I always felt that, and I still feel this way, it's like I want the works to, how do I say this right? Like, I want each work to open up space for the next work. And in order for that to happen, I need to totally kind of waste myself in each piece, like totally exhaust myself in that process. And not to sound romantic about that, and I don't romanticize it at all, but the only way that I could figure out a way to make progress in the studio was to somehow explore like that way. And so, and by doing that, it also is it's not just emotional or psychological or physical. Sometimes it's monetary as well. And so like I'm trying to sort of open up space and scope for the work to live in. And sometimes it's bleeding into other spaces, and some of it's financial. And I think I've been really lucky because each project has opened up space for the next project, where someone comes to me and they're like, hey, we got this space. I don't got any money. And it's like, you try, right? And you get a couple images. And then those images, someone sees them and they're like, hey, I got this space. Got $500. Like, wow, dang. So it's like $500, I could do something. And then it's the same thing. And it's like all of a sudden you got a few more images, and you got 20 images. And like, yeah, these look pretty good. It's like, I got a space. What's the budget? It's like, wow, 40,000. Okay, we can try something, And it's like, and it's interesting, and I bring it up, and I've been thinking about it more, and it's like this project with 12ers, for instance, like this 10-year-long project. And I had this revelation, and we'll see if it works, but, when artists talk about money, it's weird, because like if someone gave us $500 to make a piece, probably almost everyone would do it. We'd be like, yeah, totally, I'll make it. And we get really excited about $500. But in another reality, say, not to belabor this, say film, right? Like if someone's making a low budget film, it's like $2 million. It's $2 million. It's like, that's nothing to make a film. And so this question that kept popping up into my mind was like, well, why am I thinking in this scale? Like, is there some way to sort of lift the practice up and to sort of deposit it somewhere else where it needs another kind of revenue stream? And so that's something I'm thinking about now, is like the ways in which an artwork can set a series of demands. So it's a great question. And there's a lot more. There's a whole seminar probably about that. Cool.
Thank you, Michael.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for your question.
Michael. Thanks, everybody, so much for coming tonight.